Let's create a villain for your campaign. Monsters are fine for a single shot adventure, but if you really want to add flesh and bones to your campaign and make it much more memorable, you want villains. Villains are what really make the difference between just an adventure going out and killing one or two creatures or whatever, and something that is memorable because there are villains. If you think back at the movies that are really memorable, for example, if you look at the James Bond films, everybody points out as Goldfinger because Arik Goldfinger is one of the more interesting villains because he is totally understandable. Greed is his primary motivation. You understand him. He is a completely understandable villain. If we look at Star Wars, Darth Vader came off as in the first when I first saw the what became the New Hope. It was the first show, which was Star Wars, and you see that film, and he walks onto the screen. Here's a villain that really makes the show. That's what really gives the color to the show, which really makes it interesting. So if you're going to create a campaign, you eventually need to create some villains. So let's start off with that, or maybe you don't need to create them. I mean, I pulled off my shelf over here of stuff, and I was looking around, and first off, the thing is that one that came to mind is this book called Heroes and Villains. This was put out by the Judges Guild, and it actually was in one of the more recent Myth Hordes. So it has characters, and it has heroes and villains and whatever. And so if you want to just steal one, because it's great to have some sort of resources like this to when you can't think of something, when you want to do this. But I'm going to focus on how to create one. Another option, this one was on my shelf, which was called Supporting Cast, which was originally put out by Grups. And I'm sure you can find something like these, or you have some sources for villains, or you can just take some villains from, your favorite movies or whatever. But let's start creating a villain from scratch. And this is the process I try and use. So we don't want to create just a normal little mundane villain. We want somebody who's a mover and a shaker in the world that pulls strings. The picture I have is the one from The Godfather. If you look at it outside the film, which is that he says, The Godfather was someone who pulled strings. He actually was a fairly evil character, but he's very sympathetic in the movie, and you understand that. But from the outside, he's one who's very lawless, but he pulls strings. So I want to create a character that is not in the forefront, that is one who sits in the background pulling strings like the Godfather. So I created Sir Neil, and he's an advisor to the king, and he is the real power behind the throne. Just like we see in Game of Hands, you had the Hand of the King, who is the one who actually does the ordering things around. This is the kind of character I want to create, where he is the one that you go to, the one that has the power, that does things. Actually, if you want to do an interesting analogy, in the Old Testament, you have King David and you have Absalom, his son. And Absalom comes in, and if you understand what was going on, Absalom became the advisor to the king. And so that's why the Absalom rebellion took place, which is an interesting Old Testament description. And Absalom became sort of the power behind the throne, so that you didn't have to go bother the king. He took the load off his father, but eventually he turned and rebelled. So what happens is you can create characters like this. You can steal ideas from everything from the Bible to other things like that. So let's talk about what is the motivation of your villain. We're going to create a villain and what is his motivation. And I'm going to go through some of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we're going to want to understand what makes Sir Neil, which I'm going to go through as we create this. So Maslow defines the 5 needs: physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And so what is the physiological needs for our villain? What does he need? So he's going to need clothing and he's going to need shelter. Now, we're creating a villain. And this is one of my complaints I have about, if you've watched my The Fallacy of the 5-Room Dungeon, the villain is first off, he's going to want to look good. And if you've read an interesting book, it's called Dreams of Steel by Norman Spinrad, which is science fiction as if written by Adolf Hitler. You got to go look this up and do some research. But he describes the characters are all in interesting uniforms. They said that in World War II, the best looking uniforms that were on the Germans. The Germans had some very good looking uniforms from an aesthetic point of view. And so what happens is that here's our villain. We want him to look good. If you look at Star Wars, Darth Vader, all in black, very interesting looking there, particularly when there's the comparison of all the stormtroopers in white. And then you have the Emperor with his bodyguard who are in red. So the monochrome color is one. The Germans, I thought, did a better because you had blacks and grays, and you had, officers had some splash of red. If you go back to the Romans, Roman Empire, and you have blues and reds, which are various for various officers, but you can come up with the way your villain is going to look. He's going to look good. Why? Because he's a major mover and shaker. He's got the money, he's got the power. So if you've got the money and power, don't you think you would look good? You see this with all the people. You see the makeovers from someone, even here on YouTube. You see somebody who goes from having a few subscribers to someone who has 1 million subscribers because all their videos have gone viral. You see, I've seen some of this, the makeovers that they go through, because now they're concerned with lighting, now they're concerned with makeup, now everything, they start to look better. You see this with someone who wins the lottery. When they first win the lottery, they don't have an awful lot of money, and now they've got, they win big and they've got a lot of money. So obviously they're going to have somebody to come in and pamper them and make them look good. So it's just obvious that your villain is going to look good. He's going to dress well. He's going to have fine clothing and so on. He's going to have a mansion to live in. He's not going to have this little 5-room dungeon, which is one of the things I complained about. He's going to have a big mansion. This is his physiological needs. He wants to do things in style, so he will, because he's got the power and the money. Now, his safety needs, that's the second level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So why does he have a castle, or why does he have a mansion? Because it's actually his fortress. That's where he protects himself. He's going to have his personal guard to protect him because he can afford it. So he's going to have various things like that. But if we let's think about our motivation of our character. Why did our character become a villain? And normally villains, it's a Horatio Alger's rags to riches on the evil side, that he's come up and he's got some motivation for something that happened in his background. Maybe his family was killed, various things like that. You have to figure out why. For my character here, Sir Neil, we'll say that his family, he was raised in poverty. His family was destroyed by some of the machinations that between the various cliques in the kingdom, and so he wants to put an end to all this strife. He's going to want to do things so that other people, so the little people won't be hurt. Like he was hurt when he came up. So he's going to want, so his safety needs, he's going to want to protect himself, but he's seen firsthand how things can happen. So the reason he's got various treasure caches throughout his castle or his mansion is he knows that he needs to be able to pick up and run with it. That's the interesting argument. Why do you want to be able to own gold? So that because gold, you can always bribe a guard at the border. You can always bribe a border guard with gold. It's interesting philosophy, but what happens is that it makes sense for someone who has come up from being poor. They're going to want to have something that gives them security, that's going to have that they can grab in a hurry. They're going to want to have. That's why they have caches of gold throughout, so that there's various escape routes. There's going to be escape routes out of his mansion. There's going to be various things like that, and he's also, as we see, he's wealthy, so he's going to have some dedicated healers. Let's be honest. I mean, you take a look at everything from Howard Hughes, who had his personal doctors, and he got really weird. But let's say we have, and I have a hard time viewing him as a villain. Some people may disagree with me, but what happens is that you can create a villain. They're going to want to have someone to keep them healthy and care for their well-being, to make sure their food is free from poison and so on. So they're going to have healers. So now the interesting question, does he, the next level, love and belonging. So that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So does the villain have a family? If you've watched the movie Scarface, where you see him take the wife of one of his rivals at the very beginning, and you also take a look at some of the things in The Godfather. Why did the character at the end of the first Godfather, why did he go out and marry Kate? Because I think that was her name. He wanted to have a family. He wants to have that love and belonging. So you're going to have either a family, a wife, maybe a mistress or two, or if you create a female character, do the reverse, where she has some, I don't know what the proper term is, she has some men on the side. But you want to take a look at having your family. You want to create or buy or have brought up someone to, quote, carry on your line. I can't remember, there was a science fiction book about someone who would go and clone himself. And after, as he started getting a little bit older, he'd go and have someone clone himself so he had another clone to be his child. You see some of that in one of the Star Wars films, where the character had himself cloned as a child. That was Boba Fett. And what happens is that you can think about this. Does a powerful mage in your world, if you're creating a magic user, a villain, does he actually want to spawn himself to continue on? Or are they going to try and achieve immortality? This is one of your, if we're dealing with a fantasy world, is the person going to try and achieve immortality through magic, through something that will keep them? This is where you go down the road of lichdom and demi-lichdom. Or do they want to actually have someone to perpetuate the line? Those are two different decisions that you really need to decide. In a fantasy world, It's easy. There are more examples that you can come from real life where someone tries to perpetuate it by perpetuating their line. There aren't many. There are no one that I know of who's actually achieved immortality. So what happens is that you want to uh, think about how that affects that and affects the love and belonging. Do they want to have people love them for who they are? Now they may, that's the phrase is that they understand where you came from and so on. And this brings up an interesting question. Does the villain know he's a villain? In the case of this Sir Neil that I'm creating, he wants to make the world a better place. He wants to do away with these factions that are going on. So he views the terrible things that he does as just a way to achieve his ends. So does your villain view the ends justify the means? So you've got to decide where along this line does he have ethics? Does he have morals? But we'll get that would be more into our esteem and self-actualization, but we're getting in there. But with love and family, does he view cheating on his spouse as anything to be concerned with? So you have to have, there's the wonderful line in The Godfather that it says, a man who doesn't spend time with his family really can't be a man. And that's an interesting thing coming from someone who is willing to have someone murdered, have someone various things like that. So in the movie The Godfather, so you've got to think about love and esteem and what are your standards for your character that you have there. So you could run into some very, quote, hypocritical people who would be willing to put up with a lot of things, and they think that they go out and, well, those rules don't apply to me. So now we have come to the next level. It's esteem. They want fame and recognition. But do they really want the recognition? And this is an interesting question, because they may want to be behind the scenes. They don't want to be the biggest target. This goes back to their physiological needs and their safety needs, that they don't want to be the main target. So they want recognition, but they don't want mass recognition. They want to be the power behind the throne. They don't want to be the main target out there. This feeds into their safety, but they want to have the people around them know that they're the real power, so that you have them there. And then this gets into the interesting, it's a form of Munchausen syndrome, where they create a crisis in the kingdom so they can solve it and get the approbation. So there's a problem. So they manipulate things. Actually, you see in the first trilogy of the Star Wars, where you see the Emperor doing this thing. He's starting the battle so that they will build the clone army. That there's a reason that the, quote, Republic wants a clone army, and they basically elect someone to run the to rule and run the clone army. So it you take a look at that. That's setting up a scenario where they get the power. They're the ones behind the throne or beside the throne. They're not the ones out in front, but they're manipulating the crisis. They may manipulate a financial crisis, a military crisis, and so on, so that they can come to the rescue and solve it, because they know exactly how to solve it. So this gets your scheming villain in there. And then we come to the last level, self-actualization. And what is your villain? What really fulfills your villain? In the case of my Sir Neil, he gets from fulfillment that he knows he's improving the world, and he's going to leave a legacy that the world is a better place because he's getting rid of all this infighting between the various ruling families, and he's establishing a single line for the kingdom and so on. And you can see just how evil this is because he has no qualms about getting rid of other other families that could challenge the royal line. So he's the power behind the throne. He's been able to manipulate the finances of the country and so on. So here comes a very evil character because he views, what the ends justify the means. I can do anything. And your player characters, man, initially get introduced to him. They come in to the kingdom and they initially get introduced. They could actually get some quests from this. This is someone who could give them some minor quests to go out, and they don't at first they don't realize that, yeah, he's he's beside the king, and he's dealing with all the little details so we don't have to bother the upper echelon. We don't have to bother the king about things. So they come in and they get some quests, but as they go out, they start hearing horror stories about how this Sir Neil was responsible for various things happening or people accusing him. And this allows you to put an interesting view that the characters, this is where it gets really fun for me, when the characters, first off, they say, oh, this is a good guy. This is a good guy. We'll go back and talk to him, and we'll go back and get help. And now they suddenly realize maybe he's got ulterior motives. Maybe he's not the good guy they thought he was. Maybe he's in it for some other reason. Now, then they start realizing how powerful he is and how do we bring him down. And that adds a lot of interesting conflict in your campaign because you've got to deal with someone who's, quote, doing good for the kingdom. But that depends upon your viewpoint. And he may be stop destroying certain industries because he thinks they're evil. He may be promoting other industries because he thinks they're good. He may be getting rid of responsible for certain royal families being destroyed, noble families being destroyed because they're in the royal line. He's trying to manipulate who marries who because he's behind the scenes, and he wants to establish a power base so that it goes the way he wants it to go. He may not ever want to actually be the emperor or the king, but he wants to have the control of who will be king. So he's picking and basically designing his own breeding program on how that should happen by picking what he considers only the best. He could take a look at the children of the king and decide, oh, the eldest has this flaw and the second eldest has this flaw, so let's get rid of them so that the third in line is actually the one I want to be king. Or maybe he figures some way to disgrace them so that the king disowns them. These are things that your villain can do, and it puts interesting conflict into the campaign. And as your player characters go through and find that now this person who they thought was a patron, who was helping them at the beginning, they have to take down. But how? So I leave that to you to come up with. Use your imagination. But this is how I try and create a villain. I think about various situations. I really like Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it helps me to define the character in an interesting way. because we know why he does this because of his background. We know why he's doing it, all the way down to his self-actualization. Why he wants to do these things, because this is where he's viewing this will be his legacy. If you like my video, press the thumbs up button. I'd appreciate that. Or if this interests you, you can always subscribe to my channel. There's a button right above. I look forward to hearing some comments. Tell me what you think about this, and I'll try and reply, and we can see if I'll do some more of these. Thank you.